Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Beis, and Mirza Hashem, today we will be learning Daf Ayin Tes Amid Beis. Before we begin our learning tonight, our learning should be a schus for Achenu Kol Beis Yisrael, on the Sunnah Batzaru Bashivya, Ha'imdim Bein Bayam Bein Bayabasha, Hamakim Yerachem Aleihem, V'yetzieh Mitzar L'Rvacha Me'efela La'ira Mishibid L'Geula, Hashta Bagala Uvizman Kariv, V'naimar Amen. Our learning should be a schus for Shalema for our real Yosef ben Miriam Rezel and Meir ben Chaisara. They should have Refuah Shalema b'Sar Shar Chayle Yisrael. So we are holding in Siman Kuf Ayin Zayin in the middle of Sif Aleph, and we are on Ayin Tes Amid Beis. We are up to, we're 3 lines from the top by the word Ve'im, right by the Ois Ches for the Mishnah Berurah. So, what we have been discussing over here since the beginning of the Siman is the idea that when you sit down to a Seudah and you're having pas, you're eating bread, so you're going to wash, you're going to make Netilas Yadayim, then you're going to make hamotzi on the pas. The berachah of hamotzi is going to pater the vast majority of the foods that you will eat during the Seudah. So if you're eating dvarim haboyim machmas hasuda, if you're eating seudah-foods, and we described those foods as foods that are either eaten together with bread, these are foods that you're eating simultaneously together with the bread, or you're eating foods that you're not eating together with the bread, but these are bona fide seudah-foods. These are foods that you're keveya seudah on. They're foods that you eat to make a meal out of. You eat them for svia, you eat them to satiate yourself, you eat them for mazain, for nutrition, to sustain yourself. These are real meal foods. So if you're sitting down to a Seudah and you wash and you make hamotzi on your pas, and then you eat a steak, or you eat chicken, or you eat fish, you're having potatoes, you're having coleslaw, you're having pickles, you're having French fries, you're having potato kugel, whatever. All of these types of foods are foods that are eaten for svia and for mazain. If you eat them b'soich hasuda, you're eating them as part of your Seudah. They don't need a separate berachah Raishona. They're patered from a berachah Raishona by the berachah of hamotzi, nor do they require a separate berachah Achrona. They are all covered by berachas hamazain. Berachas hamazain is going to cover all of these foods. Then, in the previous year, we spoke about how about foods that are not dvarim haboyim machmas hasuda. These are not really Seudah foods. How about if you eat peiros, you eat fruit in middle of the meal? So you're having somebody sliced up an apple, and in middle of your meal, you're eating an apple. An apple is not considered dvarim haboyim machmas hasuda. Peiros, by default, are not considered dvarim haboyim machmas hasuda. Like I keep on saying, nobody's going to say I had the most delicious Cortland apple for supper tonight. Maybe it's a dessert, but a dessert is something that's bal kinuach. That is something that's not coming for Seudah purposes. It's coming to put a pleasant taste in your mouth. That's what we said kinuach means. So we said that dvarim aboim shaloi machmas hasuda, that would be something that you would have to make a berachah Raishona on. So you washed, you had pas, you're eating a steak, you're eating your French fries, and now you spy on the corner of the table a plate with sliced up apples, and you want to eat some apples. You see some nice grapes, you want to eat some nice grapes. You need to make a berachah. Why? Because this is dvarim haboim shaloi machmas hasuda. These are not considered to be seudah foods. We had the lengthy Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Daled, where he spoke about cooked peiros, etc., etc. Even there, he suggested that really, even though it's cooked, still, this is something that would require a berachah Raishona. He says, the Mishnah Berurah, if you're eating kompot for dessert, it's lekinuach, and therefore you would have to make a berachah of berachah, even though you washed and you made hamotzi on pas. Now, I do want to bring attention to bir halacha dibur hamaschil kegoin te'enim. on Ayin Tes Amid Aleph. If you go into that Bir Halacha, a few lines down into the Bir Halacha, by the words V'ayin Sham Be'emek Berachah, he says like this: V'ayin Sham Be'emek Berachah, Hatam, the reason why you have to make a bracha Rishona on these foods, Dahayil She'ein Regilin Lavai Le'ikar HaSeudah, because it is not customary and it's not typical for these type of foods to be considered seudah-foods. So the Mechaber said, if you bring dvarim abayim shaloi machmas haseudah, and the example that he gave was peros, basically, te'enim, figs, anavim, grapes, v'chol mine peros. He says that you have to make a bracha rishon on. It's brought down by the Emek bracha over here. He says, what does he write as the reasoning? Dahayil she'ein regilin lavai le'ikar haseudah, since it is not typical and it is not common for fruits to be brought as the ikar of a seudah, mikri gamkein shaloi machmas haseudah, this is not considered machmas haseudah. Now over here, I forgot to mention, the Emek bracha is talking about cooked fruit. He's not talking about raw fruit, he's talking about cooked fruit. So the Emek bracha is saying, we had this whole discussion in Mishnah Berurah's Cut and Dalit about cooked fruit, and we saw the Mishnah Berurah told us in the name of a whole list of achronim that you have to make a bracha rishona on cooked fruit. So he says the reason is because even though it's a tavshil, even though it's cooked, it's still not something that's ba for the ikar of the seudah. Says the Chavetz Chaim, and this is very important not just for this halacha, but it's important conceptually whenever we're deciding which types of foods need a bracha rishona during the meal and which types do not. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'hinei lefi zeh, based on this Emek bracha that says, why does a cooked fruit dish, why does it require a bracha rishona? Because it's not typical for it to come for ikar haseudah. B'medina sheyesh sham ribui peros ma'od. But let's say you live in a neck of the woods where they're blessed with an abundance of fruit. That's what they have on hand. They have a tremendous amount of fruit on hand. Umivashlin sham tamid peros lamazon. And in that locale, it's very common to make cooked dishes out of fruit and to serve them as an ikar part of the seudah. The way we make a potato kugel. So we make a cooked dish out of potatoes, and we consider it to be ikar haseudah. We consider the potato kugel to be a davar haba machmas haseudah, and no one is going to suggest that you should make a bar pri adama in middle of the seudah. We make a cooked dish out of rice. Well, rice is a grain. We don't make a separate bracha. We have all sorts of tavshilim, all sorts of cooked dishes that we do not make a bracha on in the middle of the seudah. So what if you live in a locale where they have a tremendous amount of peros, and because of that, it's very common for them to make cooked dishes out of fruit and to serve them for an ikar part of the seudah? Says the Bir Halacha, he says, mistabra l'chayra, it makes sense, to yesh lo din shar tavshil, that in such a locale, that would be a cooked dish that you would not make a bracha rishon on. It would be considered ikar haseudah. V'gam b'medina isenu, and even in our regions, im mevashlan aperes l'shem mazayin, if you do make a cooked dish out of fruit and you are serving it for mazayin and for svia, k'moshe karen apple tzimis l'kadayma, mitzadid b'sefer Yad Aktana, and this was quoted in the Mishnah Berurah yesterday. The Sefer Yad Aktana says, the Gamkein ain't tzarich bracha. He's of the opinion that everywhere, if you make a cooked dish out of fruit and you serve it for mazayin, you serve it as a side dish, as part of the meal, he holds that it doesn't need a bracha rishona. But since it's not klar, so Chavetz Chaim says, so I wrote that best thing to do is to make a bar priates on a raw apple and to patter this apple tzimis with your bar priates. But what you're seeing over here is, again, the reason why you need to make a bracha rishona on an apple in the middle of the seudah is because it's not a davar haba machmas haseudah. But if somehow you elevate peros to be something that is ba machmas hasuda, then already the concept exists that, okay, if you live in a place where that's what they do, if you live in a place where that's what's common, then it would be pattered by the hamotzi, and you would not make a bracha rishona. And it's important to keep that in mind for something that we're going to see today. So now, let's turn to Ayin Tes Amud Beis, 3 lines down, about the middle of the line. Says the Mechaber. So let's say you're in the middle of your Suda, and now you taka want to eat some peiros. So if you want to eat peiros, we said you have to make a bar pre'etz. It's not covered by hamotzi. You don't have to bench. It will be covered by benching, but it's not covered by the hamotzi. But now, says the Mechaber, there's a way out. There's a caveat. V'im betchilas achilosai achal ha'peiros, says the Rama, impas. If you spy the sliced up apple on the side of the table, so you take a slice of apple and you eat it together with lechem. You eat it together with bread. Now, once you're eating it together with bread, I don't care if it's called ba machmas hasuda, it's called ba shaloi machmas hasuda. If you're eating it with bread, then the bread is the ikr, the fruit is the tuffle, and you don't make a bracha on the fruit because it's covered by the hamotzi. That's open shut. That's a given. So, again, says the Mechaber, if you see the apple on the corner of the table and you want to just eat a slice of apple, you have to make a bar pre'etz. But what if you see the slice of apple, so you take a slice of apple and you eat it together with bread. Ubas soif, and then later on in the meal, you're eating more apple. Achel imahim pas. Again, you eat some apple together with the bread. Afilu im beintayim achal mehem poloi pas. Even if between these 2 times you eat the apple without bread, einam tu'una bracha af lifneim. Then you don't have to make a bracha rishona. So again, we learned yesterday, you want to eat an apple in the middle of the Suda, you have to make a bracha rishona, you have to make a bar pre'etz. Why? Because it was not covered by the hamotzi. Why wasn't it covered by the hamotzi? Because an apple in the middle of the meal by default, a fruit in the middle of the meal by default, is not considered ba machmas hasuda. That's something that's considered ba l'kinuach ba'alma. It's something that you only eat for a pleasant taste. So it's not covered by the hamotzi. You have to make a bracha rishona. Today, says the Mechaber, but let's say you eat a slice of apple with a piece of bread. You're not going to make a bar pre'etz on that piece of apple because you ate it together with a piece of bread. Now, 5 minutes later, during the Suda still, you want to eat more apple. Now you want to eat the apple without the bread. If at the end of the meal you have another piece of apple together with bread, then you never have to make a bar pre'etz. Since the first bit of apple that you ate together with bread, and the last bit of apple that you also ate together with bread, even if you eat apple in between those 2 times without bread, you don't have to make a bar pre'etz. Why? So the Mishnah Berurah is going to tell us that since you first ate the apple together with bread, it's kind of like you set the scene. You set the tone. The tone is that I'm eating it as a tuffle to the pas. And I'm having in mind that later in the Suda, I'm going to eat more of it together with the pas. Since you start eating it with pas and you finish eating it with pas, now you've elevated that apple to something that's ba machmas hasuda, and even if you eat apple in the middle without pas, it's pater from a bracha rishona, because now you've elevated it to something which is ba machmas hasuda. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah inside. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Ches, V'im betchilas achilosai. If in the beginning of your eating, you eat the peiros together with pas. Ratzonah loymar, what the Mechaber wants to say is, Shetchilas achilas oisan peiros, when you first start eating that fruit, haya im pas. You eat it together with bread. V'gam kavanoseihu lechal imam pas kamachakach. And you're planning on eating more of it with pas later on. Even if between these two times when you eat some of the apple without pas, you never have to make a bracha rishona on that apple. Why, says the Mishnah Berurah? Because since you're going to eat some of the peros beginning and end together with bread, now the apple is considered to be a davar haba machmas hasuda b'saych hasuda de'ein tzarich bracha, which does not need a bracha rishona, kanal, like we saw previously. Anything that's considered ba machmas hasuda b'saych hasuda doesn't need its own bracha rishona. You just turned this apple into a davar haba machmas hasuda. Why? Because you started eating it with pas, and you end eating it with pas. Now it's ba machmas hasuda, and it doesn't need a bracha. Now the Mishnah Berurah qualifies this a little bit. And this is where it gets very, very thorny. Kol zed dafka kishehuvu lalafes behemes apas v'loy lekinuach. But, says the Chavetz Chaim, when does this work? Again, let's go back. We look at peros by default as being a davar haba shaloi machmas hasuda. When you sit down and you want to eat some apple in the middle of the Suda, right away we look at it by default as an apple, a fig, a date, a grape, peros. These are not ba machmas hasuda. Ice cream is not ba machmas hasuda. It's not. It's likinuach ba'alma. So we don't look at it as a davar ba machmas hasuda b'saych hasuda, and that's why we said you need a bracha rishona. Now, the Mechaber is giving us a kunz. Sounds like he's giving us a trick. And he's telling you, well, if you take a bite of the apple with bread, now you can eat more apple without bread. Just remember at the end to have another bite of apple with bread. Now suddenly it doesn't need a bracha rishona. And we're saying that there's kind of a magic that by doing that, it elevates the apple to be a davar haba machmas hasuda. Says the Mishnah Berurah, no, it's not a magic. The Mishnah Berurah says, this only works if you're not eating the apple likinuach ba'alma. It only works if the apple was really brought lalafis bayis hapas. That's when it works. If you're eating in some kind of a very interesting restaurant where the food pairings are very, very interesting, and they served you a main dish of apple butter brisket, and as a side dish to the apple butter brisket, they gave you a beautiful sliced Cortland apple. So in this case, guess what? That apple was served lalafis bayis hapas. But even though it was served lalafis bayis hapas, we still would tell you it needs a bracha rishona of bar pre'etz. Why? Because I don't want to hear that a raw apple is lalafis bayis hapas. When I see a raw apple in middle of a Suda, by default, this is not lalafis bayis hapas. This is likinuach. That's why you eat apples in the middle of a Suda. You eat it likinuach. Okay, in this kooky restaurant, they serve it as a side dish. They serve it lalafis bayis hapas. No, it still needs a bar pre'etz. Unless you go ahead and you have a bite with bread, and you have a bite at the end with bread. Then you can elevate it to be a davar haba machmas hasuda. Without that, the Mishnah Berurah is saying, and he's not saying it on his own, he's saying this over here, he's quoting this, Sharitzion Ois Cotton Yud Beis, he's quoting this from the Magen Avram, based on a Rabbeinu Yoina. So he's saying, in order to make a fruit, a davar haba lalafis bayis hapas, so it's not enough to serve it with the intent that it's lalafis bayis hapas. You also need to eat it with bread. That's what he's saying over here. Again, he says, kol zed dafka kishehuvu lalafis bayis hapas. This only works if the fruit was actually served lalafis bayis hapas, v'loy likinuach. De'emhuvu rak likinuach. Because if it's clear that it was given likinuach, Even if you eat it with a bite of bread at the beginning and a bite of bread at the end, it's not going to help. And in that case, whatever you eat in the middle without bread would need a bracha Rishona. The Chavetz Chaim is very careful to point out in Sharetzion cutting Yud Gimel, whatever you eat with pas is never going to need a bracha, because whatever you eat with the pas is always going to be a tafel to the pas. Now, says the Mishnah Berurah, but there's also another there's another extreme to this shaila, and that is, we're also not talking about a case where you mamish were kavei seudah al haperes. Let's say you're going to a fruit-based restaurant, and the whole seudah is fruit-based. In that case, says the Mishnah Berurah, da'az ain't sarf sheyocha gam lebesayf and pas dafka. Then you don't have to make sure that you eat some fruit together with bread at the end of the meal. Once you started eating the fruit together with the bread, you're not going to make a bracha Rishona, even if you eat the fruit alone afterwards, because over here you are mamish kavei seudah on Paris. If you're being kavei seudah on the Paris, then that's the ikar seudah. So then it's covered by the hamotzi. So what do we have over here? If we want to just quickly encapsulate, what we've learned. Hamotzi covers everything that's bar machmas hasuda b'saych hasuda. Peiros are not considered to be bar machmas hasuda. Peiros are assumed to become likinuach ba'alma. But if you serve peiros not likinuach, if you serve peiros as something that's bar machmas hasuda, if you serve peiros lelafes bayas hapas, then if you have a bite of the peri with bread at the beginning when you first start eating the peiros, and you have another bite of the peri with bread at the end when you finish eating the peiros, then you can eat as much peiros as you want in the middle without bread, and you don't need a bracha Rishona because you've turned it into something which is bar machmas hasuda. Ois cotton test. At the end of the eating of the fruit, you also ate it with bread. But if you're not going to eat any more fruit with bread, you have to make a bracha Rishona. Find Bibir Halacha where the Mishnah Berurah, the Chavetz Chaim goes into it, says it's not so pashut. He is being machriya this way, la halacha l'maisa. So if you're going to take a piece of the apple together with a piece of bread in the beginning, but you're not going to have, and then you want to eat some without bread, and at the end you're not going to eat any more with bread, you got to make a bracha Rishona. Einam tu'un in bracha. In this scenario, you don't have to make a bracha Rishona. V'achronim kasvu, but at the end of the day, the achronim write the royal izar lechatchila, that it is proper that lechatchila you should take care kishahuvu lefanav peiros b'saych hasuda lalafis be'emes hapas, that if they do serve fruit in the middle of the meal as a part of the Suda, lalavis bayis hapas, sheyivarach mitchila aleim kaidim sheyochlim hapas, you should eat them plain without bread at first and make a bracha berachah eitz, v'yochlim k'tzas b'fnei atzmon, and eat some alone without bread, v'achakach yuchalechal bein impas and bein beloy pas, and then once you do that, you can eat as much of it as you want, whether with bread or without bread. Why? Because there are Rishonim that hold that even if you do like the mechaber and you have the first bite of the fruit with bread and the last bite of the fruit with bread, should you eat fruit in the middle without bread, there are Rishonim that hold that you have to make a bracha. Therefore, the Achronim say we don't like this idea of the mechaber. Better if you are being served fruit in the middle of the meal that is lelafes bayas hapas, then eat it without bread and make a berachah eitz. Ubediavad im loy b'tchila mutalechel ach sheyir alechel gam lebesayfim pas amnam im ikar kviyas udasar haisa b'tchila ala peiros, like we mentioned earlier. If your mom is having a seudah on fruit, then even if you're going to continue eating fruit without bread, you don't have to make a bracha Raishona, like we're going to see tomorrow in Siv Gimel. If you eat some kind of a dough pocket that is filled with fruit, so like a cherry tart, a cherry berachah, an apple berachah, you certainly don't have to make a bar priya eitz on the fruit. Because the apple inside the apple turnover is bottled to the flour, it's bottled to the mezonais of the outside. Okay, now we have an interesting sif over here, sif beis, which, like I always say, where does this come back to us? This sif comes back to us by Chassidus nowadays. So let's take a look here at sif beis. Says the Mechaber. Until now, we were discussing dvarim haboim machmas hasuda, foods that come as part of the Suda, besoich hasuda, in middle of the meal. Now we're going to discuss dvarim haboim la'achar hasuda. Now remember what we mean whenever we talk in halacha about la'achar hasuda. La'achar hasuda, we always said, means, back in the day, the format that they had for a Suda was they washed, they ate pas, then they ate their Suda, they ate all the foods, habayim machmas Suda. Then the Suda was over. When the Suda was over, they took away the table. They took away the table, they took away the bread, they took away everything. Now, they had a minig to drink and eat certain foods and drinks between the end of the Suda and benching. That was called la'achar hasuda. And sometimes you need bracha rishonas on different foods to cover the food and drink that you're going to have during that break. Now, we've said many times that we don't recognize such a break. We don't look at anything as being la'achar hasuda. We assume that the Suda continues all the way till benching. So all the way till benching, whatever we eat is called b'soich hasuda. Now says the Mechaber, Udvarim abarim la'achar hasuda kain berkas hamazon. Food that you eat after the end of the Suda, but before benching. Shahaya minig b'mei chachmei Gemara, because it was the custom in the times of the Chazal, by the Gemara times, shebesoif hasuda, that at the end of the Suda, hayu moishchim yedeihem min hapas, they would draw their hands away from the bread, meaning we're not eating any more pas. The Suda is over. We're not eating any more pas. Umisirim oisai, and indeed they used to take the pas away. V'koivim atzmam lechel peiros, and now it was time to eat fruit. V'lishtais kol ma shebeviyim al lifneim, and to drink the drinks that were brought to them at that time. So the Suda is over, and now we're being kaveya on dessert. Now we're eating things like peiros that are likinuach. So during this time, says the Mechaber, during this time at the end of the Suda, bein dvarim abayim machmas hasuda, whether you end up eating foods that are typically brought as part of the Suda. So let's say for some reason they brought you some chicken nuggets. Now, during this time period of la'achar hasuda, they took away the pas, the Suda is over. Typically, they would bring applesauce. But now, they're bringing you all sorts of foods. They brought you potato kugel. They brought you cookies. They brought you applesauce. Now, says the Mechaber, during that time, bein dvarim abar machmas hasuda, whether you eat foods that are typically machmas hasuda, bein dvarim abar shaloi machmas hasuda, or you eat foods that are typically shaloi machmas hasuda, tu'unim bracha, the foods that you eat now are going to need brachas, bein lifnehem, they're going to need bracha rishonas. So if you're going to eat chicken nuggets, you're going to have to make a sha'akal. If you're going to eat a cookie, you're going to have to make a mezainos. If you're going to eat applesauce that's finely ground, you're going to have to make a sha'akal. If it's chunky, you're going to have to make a bar priates. If you're going to eat an apple, you're going to have to make a bar priates. Bein la'achreim. And you're also going to need a separate bracha achroina. So you eat a piece of potato kugel, you're going to have to make a bar nefashis. You have a drink of water, you're going to have to make a bar nefashis. Why? The hamotzi uberkas hamazon, because the bracha of hamotzi and benching They only cover what's eaten during the seudah. This is not called during the seudah. This is called lachar seudah. Even benching won't cover the foods that you eat now. You need a new bracha Rishona and you need a separate bracha Achroina. But, says the Mechaber, we don't really have this halacha, says the Mechaber. Why? Because we don't take our hands away from the bread ad berachas hamazon. Our seudah is not considered over until benching. You never know. We might have another piece of challah. We don't take the bread away. We don't take the table away. So our seudah does not end until benching. So, what did the Mechaber just tell me? The Mechaber just said that in the times of the Gemara, the seudah was very clearly made up of different time periods. There was the part of the seudah that was called teichas seudah. Teichas seudah is the main part of the meal. That's when you're eating your bread, that's when you're eating your steak, that's when you're eating your french fries, that's when you're having your fish, that's when you're having your mashed potatoes, that's when you're having your potato kugel, that's when you're having your string beans, that's when you're having your rice. That's the meal. Then the meal would end. When the meal would end, they would take the bread away, they would take the food away. Indeed, they used to take the table away. Then they would serve other food. Now, typically, the food that they would serve then would be peiros, mine mesika, sweet things. These were eaten for kinuach. But this is not called teichas seudah anymore. This is now called la'achar seudah. Oh, it's la'achar seudah? Says the Shulchan Aruch, says the Mechaber. Now it's la'achar seudah? Now it doesn't matter what you eat. Whether you eat dvar mabar makmas seudah, whether you eat chicken nuggets and potato kugel and franks and blanks and cookies, or you eat apples and dates and figs and applesauce, grapes, whatever you eat now. Since now it's la'achar seudah, needs a bracha Rishona, it's not covered by hamotzi, and it needs a bracha Achroina because it's not covered by benching. But ends off the Mechaber, and he says not negayah to us. This whole halakha is not negayah to us. Why? Because we don't have such a thing as la'achar seudah. Our seudah doesn't end until benching. So says the Mechaber. So first, let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Mishnah Berurah is cut yod aleph. Whether you eat dvar mabar makmas seudah, what's that? Basar, meat, dog, and fish, kiyotzim is that. Ice cut yod beis, or you eat shaloi makmas seudah, k'may peiros, like fruits, umina mesika, sweet stuff, habar rak l'kiduach, foods that are only eaten for kiduach v'chanal. Ice cut yod gimel. Now you need brachas, both bracha Rishona and bracha Achroina. Bein lachreim, you even need a new bracha Achroina. Benching is not going to cover these foods. Even if you eat cake and cookies that need an alamichya, which is a bracha me'ein shalosh, it's an abbreviated benching, you would think benching would cover them. No, benching doesn't cover them. The berachas hamazon ain't a point to me'ein shalosh. We're going to learn later that benching doesn't necessarily always cover alamichya foods. Benching only covers things that you eat toich haseudah. Hamotzi only covers foods that you eat toich haseudah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, once you draw your hands away from the bread and your seudah is over, shaveinid palamelav. Now, nothing you could be eating now is tuffle to the pas. You finished with the pas. The pas is gone. So whatever you eat now can't be tuffle to the pas. So it's not covered by the bracha Rishona. It's also not covered by the bracha Achroina, because berachas hamazon only covers the seudah. You know, la'achar seudah. V'lachein tzrichid bracha b'fnei asma bein l'fnei bein la'achreim. But now, even though the Mechaber says that this halakha is not negayah to us, now let's take a look at a biur halacha. Pei amud aleph biur halacha dibur hamaschel she'ein anu regilin. Now this is a very lengthy biur halacha. I'm only touching the beginning of it. Says the Chavetz Chaim, ubeseudos gedolos, by the very big seudos, sheregilin limshach yedeim in apas, where it is the custom to draw your hands away from the bread, v'larich hashulchan, and to set a table b'minei peiros, with fruits, v'gam lishtos, and also to drink. Yesh oimrim, there are those that say the af bizmanenu shaykh din zeh, that this halacha applies nowadays too. If it's tzarich levarach aleim, and you need to make a new bracha Rishona and a separate bracha Achroina. So what did I tell you? I told you that this comes back to us by chasanas. Imagine a chasana. After the chuppah, you came into the seudah, you washed, you made hamotzie, you sat down by your table, you ate pas. You're covered now for the seudah, for all the foods that you eat. Dvar mabar machmas seudah. You get up to the first dance, you go, you dance, you come back to your table, they serve the main dish, no problem. You finish the main dish, they start the second dance. You get up to go dance the second dance, you come back, your table is gone. They cleared away the tables. In a lot of the smaller halls, this is what they do. You ate the main already, they clear away the tables. Now, they roll out a table on the side of the dance floor with cookies and potato kugel and things of water and things of soda and cups. And they call it the simchas chasen v'kala. So guess what just happened? Your seudah ended, they took away the table, and now they put out tables with mine mesika. They put out cookies. They also put out dvar mabar machmas seudah, like kugel. Sometimes they also have sesame chicken. Sometimes they also have fruits. But now, l'chayra, this is la'achar seudah. Says to be our halacha, there are those that say that l'chayra, this halacha of the mechaber, should now kick in. You want to have a piece of potato kugel, you should have to make a adama. You want to have a cookie, you should have to make a bezoinus. You want to have an apple, you should have to make a berachah. You want to have a drink of water, you should have to make a shakel. And then you should have to keep track of whatever you ate, and you should have to make a bracha achroina. You ate a bunch of cookies, you should have to make an alamichya. You ate potato kugel, you should have to make a bar nefashis. Chicken nuggets, a bar nefashis. Water, a bar nefashis. L'chayra, that's what it sounds like. But continues to be our halacha. He says, v'yei. But there are those that say, dafka b'meim. That was only in their days. Shahayu misalkin al shulchanos kind of berkas hamazon, where they actually took the tables away. Well, wait a second. By our chasanas, they do take the tables away. And since they take the tables away, it mamish looks like a new seudah. But by us, where they don't take the table away, but they do, even though you stopped eating by the regular table, you're not going to eat any more bread, if you didn't bench yet, it's still considered b'seichas seudah. And then he says, v'chein amin in kein kasav v'chayodam. But again, by our chasanas, this doesn't hold water. Because they do take the table away. And you're not going to eat any more pas. Because the table with the chal is gone. And now it is near a kiseudah acheres. They rolled out a new table. So there is a Dirshu footnote here that I saw. There's Dirshu footnote number 19. The meaning that they have by chasanas nowadays, lehistalek min seudah, where you really leave the seudah, velasik b'simchas chasen v'kala, and you make a simchas chasen v'kala. Kasha b'shal tzhu shevet alevi, Ravos does atzal, shekevit shebesalkim b'sa'oichel, since they take away the food, v'esakelim, they take away the dishes and the knives and the forks and the spoons, v'af oikrim kamish l'chanes, and they take away many of the tables. Ravosa says you can't rely on the original hamotzie. You need a new berachah. But on the other hand, that what they do by us is not considered taking away the tables and taking away the food. Because they only take away the tables the only reason they're taking away the tables is to make more room on the dance floor, not to take away the food. And everybody knows that what they're serving now is dessert. It's a continuation of the meal. They don't take away the mizrach. The head table is still there. ויש גם שולחן שמונח עליו כיבוד, שעדיין נמצא במקומי, נחשב הדבר שלא יסתלק השולחן. No, so what they want to say is that the head table is still there. They make sure to leave challah on the head table. Technically speaking, you could go over to the head table, you could still have a piece of challah. Also, the cookies that they put out, it could be that they're only a suffix pas ababakistan. There's still a tzad suffix that maybe they really are pas gomer, and if they're really pas gomer, then really they need berkas hamazon anyway. So benkach, and I think with a heavy dose of suffix brachas lahakal, it seems that the poskim nowadays say that we could rely on the hamotzi that we made at the beginning of the chasana, and we could rely on berkas hamazon to cover whatever we're going to have by the simchas chassid v'kala. But here you see where these halachas are not so pashut. All right, thank you for joining me for limud HaTorah. This was the limud HaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosham should send Yeshua for us, Parnas, and should do all those in need. We should be zeicher to the Geula Shlema with the Bias Koyel Tzedek, B'meher v'Yameinu, Amen. Be well.